audio taping it as well so that we can get all of your comments and get them down so that we can go over them later on. So first of all, we have a couple of presentations to go over with, but let's go ahead and do roll call first.
Supervisor Engel.
Here.
Here. Supervisor Goss.
Here.
Kim Scott. Cindy Robinson. Gary Thompson. Here. Mike James.
Here.
And Matt Fogarty.
All right. And Matt Fogarty. Yes. Okay, so what we'll do, yep, he's right there. Okay. All right. We have a quorum. The other two will be here shortly. Oh, there's one walking through the door right now. So,
Give me a bit here in 5 minutes.
okay. Go ahead and start off with Randy. If you could go and give us an overview, and then after the presentations, we will I'll kind of go over kind of how we're going to do the public comment and all that, and then we'll go from there. Go ahead, Randy.
All right. My name is Randy Wilson. I'm the Plumas County Planning Director, and I'm the one assigned to give this presentation tonight. So this is the Plumas County Draft Cannabis Ordinance, Public Outreach and Input Meetings.
Yeah, you might want to turn that up.
Not working?
There
It is. All right, got to get closer to it. So this is a draft ordinance.
Sorry, what was your name, sir?
My name is Randy Wilson. I'm the Plumas County Planning Director.
Thank you.
This is a draft ordinance at this point, and we're seeking input. So overview of what we're going to talk about in this presentation, the cannabis ordinance development process overview, cannabis-related issues, new state regulations, MRSA, which is related to medical, Prop 64, adult recreational, state agencies regulating cannabis activity, overview of draft cannabis ordinance and key discussion points, and then we'll take public comment. An ordinance development overview. The Board of Supervisors appointed the Cannabis Working Group.
Can you address the crowd? We really can't hear you.
I just need to get into the mic because I need to see the screen. The Cannabis Working Group has worked on the development of a draft ordinance, public outreach, and comment meetings within each supervisorial district. He's going to give me a better mic. So this is part of that outreach. There'll be a meeting in each of the supervisorial districts. There is the need for a local permit for commercial cannabis activities in order to get a state permit. The Cannabis Working Group will be making revisions to this based on public input. The Cannabis Working Group will make recommendations to the Planning Commission, and the Planning Commission will make recommendations to the Board of Supervisors.
Excuse me, sir, are you a paid employee by Plymouth County Planning Directors at this time?
Excuse me?
Are you a paid employee by?
I am the County Planning
So
Director.
you're the director of the Planning Commission, is what I understand?
Planning Department.
Planning Department.
Okay, I was told they didn't have anybody working for them at this time. So you're a full-time person there, but I have a permit pending.
Excuse me?
You're a full-time employee for Plymouth County Planning District Department.
Yes, for about 10 years.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so the Board of Supervisors approves the draft cannabis ordinance for CEQA review. The board at this point can tweak it again, and they'll have a public hearing. So there's lots of inputs to change the ordinance and tweak it as it goes along. Once the board okays the ordinance for CEQA review, California Environmental Quality Act will do a CEQA review on the draft ordinance, which could lead to further changes in the ordinance. Changes. Staff recommends that cannabis activities be taxed at the local level and that a Prop 218 tax measure be passed by the voters. So that's all part of this. This is a general overview of the ordinance process. Public hearings will be held by both the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors. Changes to the draft ordinance are always possible. The Board of Supervisors has authorized the development of a cannabis ordinance, but is not bound to approve such an ordinance if the board so chooses. So it comes down to the end, it's the board's vote. The board held 2 public hearings regarding putting a moratorium in place, but did not vote to impose a moratorium. Cannabis-related issues, and this is certainly not going to capture them all. Cannabis cultivation has been illegal and is not regulated in the past by either the state or Plumas County. Cannabis cultivation has not been taxed. Cannabis grows hidden in remote locations, environmental degradation, cartels, and violence. No permitted cannabis dispensaries are in Plumas County. There are no permitted cannabis manufacturing operations in Plumas County at this time. Neighborhood compatibility issues with cultivation and cannabis-related activities. That's the issue of an ordinance like this. New state regulations, MRCA, they keep changing it, and Prop 64. The Medical Cannabis Regulation and Safety Act was passed by the state of California. It regulates cultivation, medical cannabis dispensing, and manufactured medical cannabis products. Proposition 64, passed by California voters in November 2016, regulates recreational cannabis cultivation, recreational dispensing, and manufacturing of recreational cannabis products. Prop 64 passed in Plumas County by 51%, and I actually have the precinct breakdown if anybody's curious what that vote was countywide. So both of these laws regulate cannabis. Under both, local permits or licenses are required in order to acquire a state-issued permit. So if you don't get a local permit, you won't get a state license. That's the way it's going to work. So, state agencies are going to be regulating this also. The Department of Fish and Wildlife, the Regional Water Quality Control Board, the Department of Food and Agriculture, they're the ones that are going to be issuing the state cultivation permits. The Department of Public Health, who will be issuing, I believe, the manufacturing permits. The Bureau of Cannabis Control, I found the new name in the new state regulations, primarily dispensaries. Several county departments may be involved in a local permitting if a Plumas County cannabis ordinance is approved. Building, planning, environmental health, the Ag Commissioner. Recently, the state of California combined the cannabis, medical cannabis and recreational cannabis into one state law. Here it is. It's over 100 pages long, and all the blue and red shows changes. I'm going to admit to you that even I have not had a chance to see how they combined it all and all the issues that they're addressing in combining. I can tell you that if you get a permit and you're growing medical cannabis, it will have an M in front of it, and if you are growing recreational cannabis, it will have an R in front of it according to the state of California's new law.
Excuse me, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Where do you buy one of these permits?
This is all part of this. I think, if you mind,
Oh, I'm
ma'am,
sorry,
could you
my
let me
neighbors-
finish?
Yeah, my neighbors are growing is the only reason why I'm asking.
Prop 215.
We'll explain it to you later.
Okay.
You want
Can
that
let
down?
Randy finish, please.
Okay, so this is an exhibit from the county GIS that shows the zoning. You can't really see the details unless I zoom in. If there are questions, potentially we could do that later. The road bends up there, the railroad, and then you can see Greenville. I can zoom in on Greenville. So what you're seeing here, just in the colors, and I'm seeing it a lot better than you are, the light green is ag preserve lands. You can't see the yellow very well. Oh, I know why. PowerPoint doesn't like me very well. There we go. So here is Greenville. Just giving you some idea. The blue is generally residentially zoned properties. The yellow is what we call suburban, and those are range from 1 to 3 acres. You're seeing S3, which would be 3 acre minimums. There's purple, and that's industrial. The red in the middle and the red along the highway are commercial properties. The orange is recreation. So just give you some idea of the zoning layout that exists in this area, and I'm only zooming in on Greenville. So that's the exhibit I made for the PowerPoint. You can't zoom in on it, but that's, you get the whole idea of the county from this exhibit. And this is a countywide ordinance. The objectives of the ordinance: effectively address neighborhood compatibility issues with cultivation and cannabis-related activities, whatever neighborhood that may be in. Maybe it's the commercial neighborhood. Set standards as allowed under state law for personal recreational cannabis cultivation. What that means is no matter what, if Plumas County does not embrace commercial cultivation, either on the medical or the recreational side, under the recreational state law passed in this county by 51%, everyone is allowed 6 plants. The only way the county or a local jurisdiction can regulate that is outdoor growing of the 6 plants, not indoor growing. So if you have a residence on a property and if you're a renter, the landlord says yes, you would be allowed under the new state law, even without a local ordinance, to grow 6 plants as a resident under recreational. Set standards for what we're looking at is also setting some standards for commercial cannabis activities, including cultivation, dispensaries, and manufacturing, trying to provide a pathway for legal cultivation on private lands to become legal. We heard earlier that a lady says if somebody's cultivating, well, if they have more than 6 plants, they're not legal. But if they have less than 6 plants, right now they would be legal under the recreational standards. And because we don't have an outdoor ordinance on recreational yet, you can grow it outdoors 6 plants at this point. Also, to align local cannabis rules with the state rules and regulations and providing a pathway from local permitting to state permitting. Right now, we have the state law, and I showed you it. The local regulations are about 1 inch thick when you put them all together from all the other agencies at the state. They are onerous, and they have a lot of paperwork, and there's testing involved with the product before it goes to the consumer. So the state has really set a very high bar for activity, but they've also said the local agencies can control the permitting activities at a local level. Some reports. This is the intent of this ordinance is to set standards for personal recreational growing, develop local commercial permitting processes, standards set for commercial cultivation, including setbacks, security, and inspections. At this point, there's a handout out there. It's an overview of the zoning matrix. And it looks like this. So this group developed this matrix for the different zones and the different types of cannabis permits. And there are 12 types of cannabis permits that manage different types of the activities. And then across the top, you have all the zoning districts within Plumas County. I do not have a slide of this, unfortunately. An example is if you're going to grow, and they've set some limits here, and this is what the matrix says, and hopefully people have it. Under residential, those are the blues, the 3 Rs, the 2 Rs, the 7 Rs, and the MRs. If you had a ½ acre of residential property, they're saying special use permit. If you have a 1/3 acre, also a special use permit, or a 1/7 acre special use permit. So All they're saying at this point is if you're going to have a commercial cannabis operation in a recreational zone, this group is recommending a special use permit.
It's available online on the website. I don't think it's posted. Yeah, it's important. Yeah, we're working on it.
Okay, so under the suburban zone, we're all, and by the way, they're only allowing in the residential, the type 1C cottage indoor, which is 500 square feet, and a type C cottage outdoor mixed, which is greenhouse with light depot, they call it, 2,500 square feet. In the suburban, which is the yellow, the S1 and the S3, this group is recommending a zoning clearance permit. In other words, this code will set standards, setbacks, all these standards to operate under, and if you meet those standards, then the idea is you would get a zoning clearance and you would be able to progress. All permits at the state level are good for 1 year. All permits in this ordinance are good for 1 year, so there's a renewal process. With regards to the rural areas, and this is where you get into bigger parcels, 10 and 20 acres, again, through these series of permits, they're recommending zoning clearance meeting standards. In the commercial and industrial areas, they're only talking about the type C cottage and the type C indoor special use permits in commercial. In industrial, they're saying special use permits. In the open space, which I'm still a little confused about, they're saying special use permits. In the ag preserves, both the ag preserve and general ag, they're saying zoning clearance, meet the standards of the ordinance, and you get your permit. And also in general forest, there is no cannabis permitted on TPZ land in this ordinance. It could be allowed under state law, but it's not in this ordinance. They have not included any lands. And if you think about it, of that roughly 80% of the county being federally owned or state-owned, and another 20% being private, a big chunk of that private is private forest lands, and there's no commercial cannabis permitting under this ordinance. And then under mining, which we don't have a lot, it would be a zoning clearance permit again. So that's a real brief rundown of the ordinance. At this point, I believe somebody else has another presentation, so there's going to be an interlude here while we switch computers.
Well, explain the difference between a special use permit and the zoning. What's the process? Is it longer, shorter, costlier, less costly? How does it enforce those kinds of things?
I can't. Hold on a second. A zoning or a special use permit has standards, but it also has a public hearing process, potentially an environmental document under CEQA. So if the ordinance says in this zone you need a special use permit for these, you would have to go through a public hearing process with the zoning administrator, and there are appeal rights to the Board of Supervisors in that process. Under the zoning clearance permit, you just have to meet the standards. There's no public noticing and there's no public process involved. We would just issue the permit. I do have to tell you that these are the recommendations of the Cannabis Working Group at this point. All this could change. But the zoning, the special use permit really gives the public input, there's public notice, and there's a public hearing.
On our tax bill, does it indicate what our zoning is on our property?
You know, I was going to ask that question. How many here in this room know the zoning of their property? So maybe half. So most people don't know what it is. We have some tools. We have a county website that has a map that you can type in your address or your number.
I'm paying over $4,000. My neighbor's paying under $500.
Okay, listen, we're going through a public process and he's presenting, so we'll do the public comment later.
I'm sorry, ma'am, you're disrupting my presentation.
Well, I apologize for that. Luckily, you're being paid for it by Columbus County.
Okay, so where was I? How to get your zoning. The Plumas County website, if you go to the main page, there's a button on the main page that says map. You can click on that. It will run you through some okay this, and you can get to an area that has the zoning maps on. You click on that map, it'll allow you to put in your either address or assessor parcel number, and you'll be able to find out your zoning. So I had a feeling only about half the people would know their zoning.
Or you can call us.
Or yeah, you can call the planning department and we'll tell you.
I don't care, I do it all day long.
All right, I think, turn the light on there. This is Kevin Danaher. And go ahead, Kevin, take it away.
And I just want to say, this is awesome. I've worked a lot in Africa, Asia, Latin America, and the Middle East. There are a lot of countries in the world where this kind of democratic process just doesn't happen. It can't happen. We're lucky we live in a democracy. I live in Quincy. I own property in Quincy, and I teach at Feather River College. And in the fall, I'm going to be teaching a community class on how we can revitalize the original school building in Quincy at 50 Church Street. It's been vacant for a couple of years. We want to make it into a community center, an education center. So the history of our economy here in the county has been extractive. Gold was extractive, timber extractive, water extractive. Of the 20 million people plus that get water from our river, do we get a piece of that money? The hydroelectric is extractive. PG&E pays property tax, but they don't give us a cut of the electricity. The extractive economic model makes outsiders wealthy and leaves behind environmental damage and poverty. We rank near the top, sometimes 1 or 2, in the state of California for opioid overdose deaths. That's a sign of poverty. It's not a good thing. I've worked in a lot of third world countries. Zambia, the copper of Zambia, the gold of South Africa, the wood of Mozambique. Did they benefit? No, they didn't, right? The oil from Iraq, did the people benefit? No. So with the passage of Prop 64, we have a huge opportunity to restructure our economy in a sensible way, and there's also a challenge. Bears don't smoke, by the way. So Proposition 64 allows adult use of cannabis. Each county writes its own implementing regulations, and we can write those regs to keep the wealth and jobs local, not be extracted like previous industries, and to also protect our environment. It's the greatest resource we have, our natural environment. So the goals of the California state law take adult use cannabis production out of the hands of the illegal market, strictly control the cultivation, processing, manufacturing, distribution, testing, and sale of adult use cannabis, allow local governments to write and enforce regulations for cannabis businesses, require track and trace management. This is going to be the most traced and tracked agricultural product in this country. Cannabis is grown here already. So the question is, how are we going to do it? Mexican mafia and Russian mafia, we know the negatives of that. Big corporations who dominate other economic sectors, the media, the food system, the government, etc. Or locally rooted farmers who are committed to Plumas County, who live and work here and vote and pay taxes. So all mammals are born with cannabinoid receptors. There are so far 111 cannabinoids that have been discovered in cannabis. So you produce your own cannabinoids in your body. They're called endocannabinoids. These are produced by the human body, and most mammals produce them. Phytocannabinoids are cannabinoids that come from plants, particularly cannabis. And there's synthetic cannabinoids that are produced by corporations. Marinol is the main